People always said I had a gift for reading a room. 31 years as a commercial electrician, you learn to sense when something's off. A wire that doesn't belong. A circuit that shouldn't be drawing that much load. You develop instincts. You trust them on the job. I didn't trust them at home. That's the part I'll never fully make peace with. My name is Bernard. I'm 52 years old, and I spent 23 years married to a woman I thought I knew better than I knew myself. We met at a church fundraiser in Columbus, Ohio. She was volunteering at the food table. I was there because my mother dragged me. She laughed at something I said that wasn't even that funny, and I thought, this one's different. Her name was Nadia. We got married 18 months later. Had our first son, Cooper. No, wait, I can't use that. We had our first son, Theo. No, that's on the list too. Let me start the names fresh. We had our first son, Braden, 2 years into the marriage. He was born on a Tuesday, and I remember standing in that hospital hallway at 3 a.m., feeling like my chest had been cracked open in the best possible way. 3 years after that came our daughter, Iris. I need to check myself. Let me be careful here. I'll use the names the story needs, names that aren't on that list. My wife was Nadia. Our oldest son, I'll call him Archer. Our daughter, Sloane. Those names matter because what came later will matter more when you know who was in that house. For most of our marriage, things were fine. Not perfect, nobody's marriage is, but fine in the way that means you're not looking for the exit. We built a life. I worked long hours on commercial sites across central Ohio. Nadia was a registered nurse, night shifts at a regional hospital 40 minutes from our house. The hours were hard on both of us, but we made it work. She handled the school pickups on her off days. I handled the weekends. We had a system. Around year 16, she got a promotion to charge nurse. More responsibility, more prestige, more continuing education requirements. That last part is the part that matters. The hospital started sending her to professional development conferences twice a year, sometimes 3 times. Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, 2 or 3 nights at a stretch. She'd come home energized in a way that, at first, I thought was just professional pride. A woman who'd worked night shifts for a decade finally getting recognized. I was happy for her. The first time I noticed something different was after a weekend in Indianapolis. She walked through the door on a Sunday evening and there was a looseness about her. Not tired loose. Not travel-worn, but something lighter. She hugged me and laughed at the dog trying to jump on her luggage, and she was glowing in a way that had nothing to do with career advancement. I told myself I was imagining it. My dad, he passed 6 years ago, but his voice is still the clearest in my head, used to say, "Bernie, your gut doesn't have an agenda. Your heart does. Listen to the right one." I didn't listen. 3 weeks after the Indianapolis trip, I found a receipt in the pocket of a jacket she'd taken on the trip. Hotel bar. 2 glasses of wine, 1 beer, a shared appetizer. 11:47 p.m. She told me the receipt was from a group dinner with colleagues, said it ended up in her pocket when someone handed her things to carry. I believed her. Or I made myself believe her, which isn't the same thing. That was the first thread. I should have pulled it. I didn't. The second time, she came back from a conference in Pittsburgh, and she was different in a way I couldn't name. Not glowing this time. Quieter. More attentive. She made my favorite dinner that week without me asking. She suggested we take a weekend trip for our anniversary, which was still 4 months away. She was trying, and something about the trying felt off. Like someone compensating for a deficit I didn't know existed yet. Archer was 17 by then. He said something to me one night when we were watching a game. Just threw it out there like it was nothing. "Dad, does Mom seem weird to you lately?" I told him she was just stressed with work. He nodded and went back to his phone and didn't say another word about it. I wish I'd asked him what he'd seen. The thing about suspicion is that once it takes root, it changes the shape of everything you thought you knew. I started noticing small things. Her phone face down on the counter when it used to sit face up. Her stepping outside to take calls she used to take in the kitchen. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point at in a courtroom. Just the accumulation of small adjustments that people make when they're managing 2 lives. I was doing a big commercial job in Delaware, Ohio. A new medical office complex, and I had a subcontractor named Phil working under me. Phil was a good 15 years older than me, divorced twice. One evening we were finishing up and he said, out of nowhere, "You ever think about hiring a private investigator?" I must have given him a look because he put his hands up and said, "Not saying anything, Bernie, just, sometimes a man needs to know." I drove home that night and I didn't sleep. By 3 in the morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table on my laptop looking up licensed investigators in Central Ohio. I hired a man named Doyle Mercer, not from that list, on a Wednesday morning. Met him at a diner, offered 40. He was 60, looked like a retired high school principal, and the kind of still eyes that made you feel like every word you said was being cataloged. I told him what I'd noticed. The trips. The receipt. The phone. He didn't react to any of it. The conferences, he said. Are they through the hospital or through an outside organization? I didn't know. I'd never thought to ask. Find out, he said. That tells us whether there's a schedule we can verify. I found out by doing something simple. I called the hospital's continuing education office and said I was updating our household insurance records and needed to confirm my wife's travel schedule for the year. The woman on the phone was helpful. She gave me 4 dates. 3 of them matched what Nadia had told me. The 4th, a Friday through Sunday in Cleveland in March, didn't match anything Nadia had ever mentioned. I called Doyle from my truck. He said, "Okay, now we work. I'm not going to walk you through every detail of the next 6 weeks because some of it is still too hard to sit with, and some of it would just be putting my pain on display in a way that doesn't serve anything. What I'll tell you is the shape of what Doyle found." His name was Fletcher Ames, a physician's assistant at a hospital in the Cleveland metro area, 44 years old, married with 2 kids of his own. They'd been together for at least 3 years. Doyle found hotel records, charge card statements, and enough photographic documentation that I didn't need anything else. The Cleveland conference in March was not a hospital event. It was a weekend trip Nadia had invented entirely. 3 years, maybe longer. Doyle said the earliest documented contact he could find was about 38 months back, but he was honest with me. That's the paper trail I could access. The beginning could have been earlier. I asked him to also check something that I barely had the courage to say out loud, whether there was any reason, any financial or legal reason, that I should consider whether our children were mine. Doyle was quiet for a moment. He said, "You want me to help you with that?" I said yes. Archer was 17. I knew his timeline. He was mine. Born 2 years into our marriage, long before any of this could have started. Sloane was 14. Her timing was closer to the window. Doyle couldn't rule out. I'll tell you something that nobody tells you about this part. Getting the DNA test isn't the hardest thing. The hardest thing is standing in a pharmacy buying a cheek swap kit and trying to look like a normal person while your entire internal world is coming apart. I was there in that aisle for almost 10 minutes. A teenage kid working stock asked me if I needed help finding something. I said no thank you, and I put the kit in my basket, and I bought it along with a bottle of Gatorade and a pack of gum, so it looked like a normal purchase. I tested both kids without them knowing. I'm not proud of that. I understand why it was necessary, and I'm still not entirely at peace with it. Archer was mine. I already knew that in my bones, but seeing the confirmation still made me close my eyes and breathe for a long time. Sloane was mine too. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the lab and I cried. Not from grief exactly, but from relief so acute it felt like something physically releasing in my chest. My kids were my kids. Whatever else was happening, whatever else Nadia had taken from our marriage, she hadn't taken that. I confronted her on a Thursday evening in October. Archer was at a friend's place. Sloane was at volleyball practice. I had everything. The hotel records, the documentation Doyle had put together, printed and in a folder on the kitchen table. I didn't yell. That surprises me even now. I thought I would. I'd spent weeks imagining the conversation, playing it out in my head, and in those rehearsals I was angry in ways that frightened me. But when she walked into the kitchen and saw the folder and saw my face, something in me went very quiet, almost clinical. I said, "Fletcher Ames. 3 years. Tell me I have the wrong person." She didn't say anything for a long time. She sat down at the table slowly, like the air had been let out of her. Then she said, "How did you—" "That's not what I asked." She told me she was sorry. She told me it started as a friendship at a medical conference, that it grew into something she didn't intend, that she tried to end it twice. She said she still loved me. She said our family was the most important thing in her life. I listened to all of it. I didn't respond to most of it. When she finished, I said, "I want you to know that I tested the kids." I watched her face carefully when I said that. "They're both mine. I need you to understand that I checked, and that's what our marriage came to." She started crying. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's true, and because what she said next is something I've turned over in my mind many times since. She said, "I didn't deserve you, Bernard. I didn't know that until now." I said, "You're right. You didn't." I filed for divorce in November. I retained a very good attorney, a woman named Cass Bogler, who specialized in contested divorce proceedings and who looked at the documentation I handed her and said, with professional calm, "We have considerable leverage here." My first instinct was to go after everything, the house, full custody, whatever I could take. But Cass counseled me to think long-term, which is advice I now consider one of the most valuable things I received through the whole process. She said, "Anger makes expensive decisions. What outcome serves your children 5 years from now?" I thought about that for 2 weeks before I answered. What I went after, the house. Our kids needed stability. I paid off the mortgage on that house, and I'd be damned if Nadia was going to stay in it while I rented an apartment. I got the house. What I also went after, retroactive legal consultation fees and a portion of documented marital assets she'd redirected. There were charges on a shared card that funded her trips beyond what the hospital covered, and Cass identified about $14,000 in personal expenditures tied to the affair. I recovered that in the settlement. What I considered going after and didn't, Fletcher Ames himself. In Ohio, alienation of affection claims are complicated, and the emotional cost of a civil suit against him wasn't something I was willing to carry. I had 2 kids to raise. I chose to use my energy on them. Cass did send Fletcher's wife a letter. That wasn't legal action. That was information. His wife deserved to know. What she did with it was her business. The divorce was finalized in April, 17 months after I first saw Doyle Mercer in that diner off Route 40. I won't pretend the year in between was anything other than the hardest of my life. Harder than losing my dad. Harder than the job site accident in 2009 that put me in physical therapy for 4 months. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with the end of a long marriage. Not clean grief, not the grief of loss, but the grief of revision, going back through 23 years and re-examining every moment through the new lens. Wondering which trips were real, wondering which warmth was genuine, wondering whether the woman you built a life with was ever fully present in that life, or whether some part of her was always somewhere else. That's the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself. It shows up at random, at the grocery store, reaching for the brand of coffee she preferred, at Sloane's volleyball games, sitting alone in the bleachers where I used to sit next to her, at Christmas, the first one, when the house was mine and the tree was smaller than usual, and Archer made breakfast and didn't say much but sat next to me at the counter for a long time without needing to fill the silence. That kid. He knew before I did. He was 17 years old, and he saw something I couldn't let myself see, and he never once said "I told you so." Not once. There are things I did right after the divorce that I'm proud of. I told both kids the truth, age appropriately, but the truth. They were old enough. Archer, especially. I didn't villainize their mother, and I want to be clear about that, because it would have been easy to. But they deserved honesty about why our family changed shape, and I gave them that. I started therapy in January, about 3 months after the confrontation. I don't know why men are so resistant to it. I was resistant to it. My buddy Phil basically told me I was being an idiot and made me call the number. The therapist I found, a man about my age named Dr. Ray Osterman, said something in our second session that I've carried since. He said, "You're grieving a marriage and a version of yourself that believed in it. Both things are real losses. You're allowed to mourn them both." That gave me permission I didn't know I needed. I also started working on what I'd been putting off for years, taking my electrical contractor's license to the next level. I'd always had the skills to go independent, to run my own operation. I'd stayed as an employee because it felt safer, because the benefits were good, because it was easier. Fear dressed up as pragmatism. Nadia's betrayal cracked something open in me that I'm not sure I'd have cracked open on my own. It removed the illusion of safety. If the foundation I thought I was standing on wasn't what I believed it was, then the fear of starting something new was also just an illusion. I incorporated Caldwell Electric. Caldwell is my mother's maiden name. In June, 8 months after I filed for divorce. By the following spring, I had 6 guys working under me and a contract with a commercial developer that paid more in 1 year than I'd made in any 2 years combined. Sloane is 16 now. She plays volleyball and reads too many books, and has her mother's laugh, which used to hurt and now mostly just sounds like Sloane. She asked me once, about a year after everything happened, whether I thought her mom was a bad person. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I said, "I think she made choices that hurt people who loved her. Whether that makes someone bad or just human, I'm still figuring that out. She seems satisfied with that. I'm not sure I am, but it was the honest answer. Archer is 20 now. He's studying engineering at Ohio State. We talk every week, usually Sunday nights. He's more emotionally intelligent than I was at his age. Probably more than I am now. A few months ago, he told me he was proud of how I handled everything, and I had to put the phone down for a second to collect myself. 20 years old, and he's telling his father he's proud of him. I don't know what I did right to produce that kid, but I'll take it. I've been with someone new for about 7 months. Her name is Vera. She's a high school art teacher, 50 years old, divorced with a son in college. We met at a fundraiser, which strikes me as either beautifully circular or just a thing that happens in Columbus. She's not Nadia, which sounds obvious, but I mean it in a specific way. She's not someone I'm trying to figure out or brace against. She's someone I can sit in a room with in complete silence and feel nothing but okay. I'm not in a rush. I learned something about myself through all of this. I spent 23 years trying to preserve a version of my life that wasn't fully real. And I'm not interested in preservation anymore. I'm interested in what's actually there. If you're reading this or listening to this, and you're in the early part of what I went through, when the threads are starting to come loose and you're trying to decide whether to pull at them or weave them back in, I'll tell you what I wish someone had told me. Your gut doesn't have an agenda. Your hope does. The question isn't whether you can survive knowing the truth. You can. I did. The question is whether you can survive spending another 10 years not knowing. I couldn't. And the thing about coming through the other side, not over it, not past it, but through it, is that you find out exactly what you're made of. You find out your kids are more resilient than you thought. You find out the version of yourself that existed before the marriage is still in there, with more miles on him and a little more scar tissue, but intact. I started a company that's mine. I raised 2 kids who are turning into people I genuinely like. I sleep without listening for something to be wrong. My dad was right about the gut. I'm sorry it took me this long to listen. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect, not in any cosmic sense. I don't put much stock in the idea that the universe is keeping score, but I do believe that the choices people make accumulate. They stack, and eventually the weight of them lands somewhere, on someone, and the landing is never clean. Nadia made choices for 3 years, maybe longer. Every trip she packed for, every cover story she built, every time she came home and sat at our dinner table and looked at Archer and Sloan and looked at me, those were choices, not mistakes, not moments of weakness. Sustained, deliberate choices. And the thing about that kind of sustained deception is that it doesn't just betray the person being lied to, it slowly hollows out the person doing the lying. I don't say that to excuse what she did. I say it because I watched it happen, and I understand it now in a way I couldn't when I was standing in the middle of it. The cost to me was obvious. 23 years, a marriage, a version of my life I believed in, completely. But I think the cost to her was something she didn't fully account for either. The gradual erosion of being someone you can respect when you're alone in a quiet room. What I keep coming back to, what I turn over more than anything else, is the question of intelligence. Not book intelligence. The other kind. The kind that asks you to look clearly at your own life without flinching. I spent years being smart about everything except the thing that mattered most. I could read a circuit, manage a crew, identify a problem on a job site in 30 seconds, and I couldn't read what was happening in my own home because I'd made a choice, unconscious, but a choice to not look. That's not ignorance. That's a failure of courage dressed up as trust. The day I hired Doyle Mercer wasn't the day I was brave. It was the day I finally stopped being a coward about something I'd been avoiding for years. And even then, the courage wasn't comfortable. It felt awful. It felt like choosing to walk towards something that might destroy you. But there's a version of destruction that clears ground, and there's a version that just buries you slowly. I've been living the slow burial. The walk toward truth, as ugly as it was the first honest thing I'd done in a long time. Archer told me he was proud of me, and I've thought about why that landed so hard. I think it's because what he was really saying was, you stayed upright. He watched his father get knocked down and get back up without becoming someone unrecognizable. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole thing. Integrity isn't who you are when life is easy. It's who you remain when the thing you built your life around turns out to be something other than what you were told. I started Caldwell Electric because I finally stopped letting fear make my decisions. Sloan is becoming someone I genuinely admire. Vera makes me feel like presence is enough. that just being honest and available is, in fact, sufficient. None of that exists if I stay in that house looking the other way. All of it exists because I chose, eventually, to see clearly. That's the only lesson I have, not wisdom from a book, just what I learned from living through it. See clearly. Act on what you see. Become who you actually are, not who you agreed to be for someone else's comfort. It's enough. It turns out it's more than enough.